Welcome to the Big Success Podcast, cutting-edge conversations on business and personal success, as well as how to level up. Here's your host, #1 business coach in the world, Brad Sugars.
This week on the Big Success Podcast, we have the Jonathan MacDonald. His book, Powered by Change, was the #1 bestseller and voted as Business Book of the Year in 2019. His sequel to the book is also out, The Rise of Advanced Thought. Now, let's go back a little ways. Award-winning, best-selling author, absolutely all of that sort of stuff. Keynote speaker, I've used him on a bunch of stages around the world and had him teach. His forethought on the digital world and where the world is transforming to is amazing. But what we're going to look at today is change. We're going to look at transformation. His take, and I just finished the interview, so it is phenomenal. His take on success is vastly different to what I've heard from so many people on this podcast before. So I think you're going to love that. How we get into his area of transformation and change in the second segment. Some of the stuff he talks about there, the AI, all of these things will possibly blow your mind. I mean, this is an entrepreneur investor who he consults with the like of Google and IKEA and Sony, Heineken, Lego, you name the blue chip company, P&G, Apple, Microsoft. These are all the companies that bring him in to change their thinking about where they're going and set their goals and transform their business. Every time I chat with him, I feel like I've got so much more to learn, and I think that you'll find the same today. Amazing thinking. Welcome him in. It's actually his 50th birthday. He said he'd only do it for me on his birthday. This is Jonathan MacDonald. So, Jonathan, I got to ask you the first question every podcast asks. What is success to you? Like, how do you define success?
For me, I think there's a few different contexts. There's a personal context of success, which is down to how you're measuring your own fulfillment and your own potential. I remember Mark Parker from Nike once said that he doesn't measure the distance between Nike and the competition. He measures the distance between Nike and its potential. And I like that. It kind of feels to me that that's kind of a way of personal success metrics. And then there's an external version, or an external context, which is whether or not you're successful in the eyes of other people.
Yeah.
And of course, people like you and I doubt care that much about the second version, and of course it comes with a kind of a downside as well, because as soon as you're successful, you're seen as a target, and as soon as you're seen as a target, then people can write all kinds of stuff and make up all kinds of crap. So I'm more interested in the first context of personal fulfillment and personal potential. That's how I see it.
So how do you, on a day-to-day basis or on an annual basis, how do you compare where I'm at versus my potential? Is there a way you do that?
Yeah, I kind of see it as a three-pronged metric, really. To be honest, no one's ever actually asked me about this. So this is kind of a world exclusive. There's no other podcast you'll find with me speaking about this particular point. So I'm glad you asked. There's three kind of levels. The first one is whether or not I feel as if I'm achieving my ability to think as clearly and as proactively as I could. Mm-hmm. So I'm almost constantly thinking about that, kind of thinking about how I think. The second is around how what I'm saying or how I'm interacting with people, which is predominantly listening. And we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth in a correct ratio for a reason. So it's whether or not I'm listening actively enough and whether or not I'm speaking proactively enough and constructively enough. And the third is in terms of action. So what I'm doing is what I'm doing the best that I could be doing for myself, which is my weak spot actually, or is it the best I could be doing for other people? So for instance, my physical activity could be better. I spend a lot of time sitting down. I see you now standing up. I could be doing this standing up and I don't. And also this morning, because it's my 50th birthday today.
Oh, happy birthday, dude. I didn't know that. 1973, baby, huh?
That's right. That's right. So my wife made me a giant breakfast and we've had a few mimosas. So I'm kind of out of my Weight Watchers points already, and it's not even like 1 o'clock in the afternoon yet. So it's kind of, but these are the habits that, so I try and look at it on how I think, how I speak and listen, I communicate, and how I act. And I think I'm probably majoring in the thought processes side. That bit I'm probably the most active on. I'm minoring in the activity side and health side, and I need to really work on that. I'm kind of, 40 pounds overweight. There's so much more I could do to refine my habits. So my priority at the moment is to work on my activity side and my actions. Yeah. And I think I'm much better at communication nowadays because I'm learning more by listening to smarter people than me. And that's kind of the first two contexts are pretty much in tune. Yeah. The third one is still work in progress.
We've all got that. We all, and people use the word balance. I like the word harmony in life rather than balance. And you try and do that. I want to go backwards in life though, and say, when did Jonathan MacDonald choose success? When did you actually choose? Like, was it a young boy? Was there a point in time where you said, you know what, I'm going to be successful?
I think that when I was younger, I was given up at birth. I grew up in a couple of foster homes and orphanages, and then I got adopted by a family who were very working class and had to start from scratch. The first 10 years of my life were, literally it was Christmas time. It was an apple, maybe in a pencil or whatever for Christmas. And, we had absolutely nothing, but, it was home. And so I didn't see success as a thing that was an aspirational concept. It was more like survival.
Yeah.
And so my version of success internally is whether or not I'm able to get food on the table, whether or not I'm able to allow my parents to retire. And eventually that I managed to do that.
Yeah.
And so I've never actually seen it as something that is a concept that is different than survival for me. Yeah. And when people say that I've been successful, I apparently externally I have been quite successful, with whether it's any of the achievements that I've had, but I execute. All I do is I plan and I prepare and then I execute. And I do that with everything in my entire life. And with no exceptions whatsoever. And if you could say that's success, then fantastic. That's just how I roll.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because, when we define success for ourselves, meeting your potential is yours, and then looking at it, it's a different way of doing it. So if you go back to that formula you just sort of said, I plan, prepare, and then act, is that, in your mind, is that how success happens? Like if you watch other people who succeed, is that what you're seeing? Or is there another formula, another way you see success happening?
So there's a Netflix documentary at the moment called Breakpoint, which is around last year's tennis series. Mm-hmm. And I'm 4 episodes in, and the entire set of, it's a brilliant documentary, absolutely fantastic. Even if you don't like tennis, it's brilliant because the success criteria is down to one sentence. You could describe the entire documentary, which, by the way, is by the same producers, I think, as Drive to Survive, which is a Formula One version on Netflix, which is coming out in 20 days' time, I think, 25 days' time for last season. It's all inside one sentence. And that's a quote, a Mark Twain quote, which is, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. And that's the entire Netflix documentary. You can watch all of these different episodes, and it's purely based on whether the player, in their mindset, in that moment, believes that they can. The entire thing is based on that. They haven't said it, they haven't highlighted it, but if you watch it, and I challenge any listener to try and see if you can see the message that's coming through. Yeah. Because your match point, you're 2 match points down, your opponents serve, and the people who think this is over, I'm done, I'm in the showers early, definitely are going to lose. Those that say, right, now I've just got to win the next 3 points, they almost certainly win. So it's not necessarily down to physical ability. These players are all pretty much the same capabilities. Obviously, there's freaks of nature in the world, but Fritz, the guy, your dude Taylor Fritz is like 6'5". He's anatomically, it's useful. But at the end of the day, really, but some of these things are kind of marginal gains. The real gain is whether or not you actually have the capability to park your emotions for a moment and go, sure, you're 2 sets down. Got it. That sucks. It's better to be 2 sets up. Got it. But the thing is, it's a fight. It's a best out of 5. So, there's still some leeway here. I don't believe it's purely down to whether or not you stand up one more time and you get thrown down. Yeah. That's the law of martial arts.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it.
Yeah. I said, I'm living here in Vegas, the old Doyle Bronson. I just need a chip and a chair. As long as I've got a chance, I can win. As long as there's a chance. And that's an interesting one. So then let's flip that over. How does failure teach success in your mind?
I think there's only one categorization of failure, and that is not learning. So provided you're learning, you're not failing. You're just learning. And so real failure is when something happens and you don't learn from it. That's a disaster. That's like the most failing of fails. Whereas if something happens and you learn from it, I mean, in business, I would say I've had, out of all the ideas I've ever had and all the things I've done and all the startups I've been involved with, I've got about 50%, if I'm lucky, a 50% strike rate.
Yeah.
So 50% of the time it works, 50% of the time it sucks. And I say this to everyone I'm ever in business with. I start off in a business and say to them, listen, it could go to shit. It could go wrong or it could go right. And I don't know which way it's going to go, but we're going to go for it anyway. Right?
Yeah.
And so as long as I can learn from the times when it's quote unquote doesn't go right, if I can learn from that, like for instance, I've learned in the last 5 years that my biggest weakness was trusting the wrong people. And that's kind of, this is a big kind of eye opener because I thought I had a pretty good read on people. And the last 5 years has taught me that I have a really my read on people sucks. So that means I haven't failed in reading people wrong because I've now learned that that's a weak spot.
Yeah.
If I didn't notice that as a weak spot and I didn't have the humility to think, hold a minute, I need to work on this, then I'd have failed.
Yeah, that word humility is really important in learning, isn't it? Oh, you're on the Big Success Podcast. We're with Jonathan MacDonald. We're going to come back and talk about change and communication, the digital world and transformation. This is what we're doing. Let's see you in a second.
Join Brad Sugars' Landlord event and you will quickly see why real estate investing has long been the backbone of serious long-term wealth for so many. That said, so many try and fail at creating wealth because they simply don't learn how. Visit bradsugars.com and attend this program as a standalone or as part of a Brad Sugars' Entrepreneurial University.
And you're back on the Big Success Podcast. I'm Brad Sugars. We are with the Jonathan MacDonald, famous author, famous speaker, and crazy man sometimes. Buddy, over the years, you've come and spoken at conferences with us. You've done a bunch of things with us and helped us learn a lot of things. One of the things is that of change. How do we succeed at change?
I think the main thing about change to understand is that it's inevitable. And that's a massive point to kind of digest. Today's the slowest pace of change you'll ever experience. So we don't actually, we have a choice in theory. I mean, when the winds of change are blowing, we can either build a wall or build a windmill. But the idea, getting your mind around the fact that change is the only thing that we know is going to happen, and that today is the slowest pace of change means that dealing with change is largely about mindset. And sure, it's handy to have a bank full of cash. It's handy to have a product market fit. It's handy to have 1 million customers. It's handy to have all those things. But the truth is, you can have all of that stuff. I mean, there are many, many companies that have had all of that stuff and still lost. 84% of the Fortune 500 in the last 40 years have gone out of business. So, you're never too big to fail. You should just fail bigger. So, and the difference between failure and success in that context is largely about how people conceive change and act upon it. And what I've noticed is that companies that go out of business tend to have handled change in a way that's disingenuous. It's not productive. In other words, they've built a wall and hoped that change will pass. It's like people who say to me at the moment, they go, wow, I'm so glad that COVID's finished. Oh, thank goodness, no more pandemics. And I'm like, wow, you think that that's it? You think that you're going to have one pandemic? Interesting. You think that there's no more lockdowns in your life?
Yeah.
Interesting point. It's like, the only thing that we know is that today isn't a predictor of the future. So you may as well assume, and I my wife says that I'm realistically pessimistic. My view is that, it's pretty much a guarantee that stuff's going to go south. And so I'm thinking almost all the time about what would happen if. And I plan accordingly. I create on Udemy, is it Udemy? Yeah, it's on Udemy or Coursera. I've got a course called How to Be a Professional Speaker. And there's a module about how to be a professional speaker online. And I recorded that 7 years before the lockdown, specifically just in case the entire speaking industry stopped and you had to do online talks. And 7 years later, the lockdown happens and the course sales went through the roof.
Yeah.
And it's only purely because I was thinking, well, what would disrupt me? I mean, if I didn't have the ability to speak on stage, or I couldn't write books or whatever, what then? And now I'm thinking about what happens if I can't think anymore, because predominantly I'm cognitive. So that's my asset. So I'm thinking, what happens? So what I'm building now is an AI which can learn me as much as humanly possible, so that the next interview you and I do, if I'm not around anymore, you could have with my AI that has this pretty much the same understanding of me as I do.
I'm both excited by that and extraordinarily challenged by that at the same time. So I'm going to jump straight to, I'm going to come back to that point though. Changing your thinking, because when you did Powered by Change, you came up with this, the Rise of Advanced Thought, as the sequel, I guess, to Powered by Change. What is the key success factors in changing our thinking?
Well, if you start it from a really base grassroots level, it's extremely important to understand that there are, two types of thought. There's the kind of fast and slow, or system 1, system 2. Kahneman and Tversky did brilliant work in the 70s about this. And Thinking Fast and Slow is a great book. But at the end of the day, if you think about the two systems that we have a very slow, rational, logical thought process inside our brain, which is about 5% of how we think. Mm-hmm. And then 95% of how we think is irrational, unpredictable, highly emotional, crazy, right? So, and people will be listening to this going, no, I'm very much more 50-50. And it's like, well, that's an emotional response to what I just said. So we are actually irrational, unpredictable people. And what we tend to be as well is thinking in ways that are pretty much the same pattern as the day before. So we think about 80 to 90,000 thoughts per day, and about 80% of those thoughts the same as the day before. Mm-hmm. So we're living in a holding pattern of bias. And that bias is the emotional part, where we actually prefer things that we know we like, or we eat things that we know make us comfortable, and we sit on a certain sofa because that's what, or we do things that we think is going to make us lucky, or we see a penny or a cent on the ground, and we pick it up because that's going to be lucky, or we don't walk under ladders. And all of this stuff is complete fiction, but it makes us feel more secure and more comfortable. And so in terms of mindsets to enable change to be productive, the starting point is to realize that if we can work on our thoughts as much as we work on our bodies at the gym, or as much as we work on our relationships, if we can work on our thoughts, then we can actually enable a life and fulfillment that's far more advantageous for ourselves, because we tend to be sleepwalking through life. And that's why the Rise of Advanced Thought exists, because it's like, hey, this is a muscle. Your thought muscle is the most important muscle. Bear in mind, it controls your reality. What you actually believe in and what you do in your life comes from how you think. And as the saying goes, you've got to watch your thoughts, because they become your behaviors, and behaviors become your destiny. So that we have to think about how we're thinking much more. And that's why I had to write The Rise of Advanced Thought. And the reason I self-published it is because the publishers were absolutely disinterested. They said, Powered by Change just needs a sequel about businesses. And I said, but businesses are full of people. I need to book about people. That's what businesses are. Businesses are people. And they're like, no, it has to be about business. And I said, well, I'm going to write a book about people. And they were like, well, you have to go on your own. So I self-published it and sold 70 times as many copies on my own. Right.
Yeah. It's funny that way that they just don't see that, when we build it. But hang on, let's jump into the next section then. Transformation. Let's go to the business side of transformation, then come back to the individual side of transformation. How do we succeed at transformation?
I think that if we don't have a purpose and an objective in place, it's hard to know what you're transforming toward. So it's like kind of setting a satellite navigation system without a destination. So I think it's extremely important to actually work out where it is that we want to get to, and stop the negative concern about not having the roadmap in place yet. That's fine. Let's park the fact that we don't actually have the roadmap. But let's work out what the destination should feel like, or look like, or sense. And that's the starting point. And when I see transformation programs that haven't worked, my first exclusive question throughout my whole 33 years in business is the same question I've always asked, which is, where were you trying to get to? What was the actual destination? 90% of the time when transformation doesn't work, they've gone, well, we never really kind of worked that out. And I'm like, how would you have imagined that the satellite navigation system would have got you to where? Because you don't actually know where it is. So I would say, Einstein said that if he had 60 minutes to answer the hardest question in the world, he would spend 55 minutes defining the question. and then 5 minutes solving it. And that's my point about transformation.
Huh. Very neat. Very unique. So that comes back to the work you've done on the digital world, which if anyone hasn't studied Jonathan's stuff on the future and the digital stuff, please do that. It's phenomenal. So if you're looking at transformation today, understanding what is already available is a massive part of defining where you want to go, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I have a news feed. I use Feedly for my news feed, and I pay for the premium version, which I'd highly recommend. I'm not an affiliate. I just think it's brilliant. And my Feedly feed has got maybe 900 news sources, and I spend at least an hour each day observing what's happening all over the world in all industries. And the reason I do that is because if I don't have an oversight of what's going on, it's very, very hard to predict what's around the corner or sense the trends. You know, there's a zeitgeist at the moment about certain topics in certain areas of the world that are completely ignored in other areas of the world. So if someone comes up to me and says, hey, we've got this new idea, would you like to consider coming on as a non-exec or a chairman? I said, well, you do realize that Tencent are just about to launch this in Asia, right? And they're like, no, we didn't know. And it's like, you've got to at least look into the stuff that you're doing around the world. Yeah. But my advice would be to look into all other industries as well. Yeah. That's my view.
So let's go back then. Transformation as an individual. Does the same rule apply, or is there more to it, transforming yourself?
I think it's the same in both contexts. So for instance, I know that I want to be 40 pounds lighter weight because I'm 50 years old as of today, as we know. And I think I'm at a risk at the moment of probably type 2 diabetes risk. I think there's probably, there's a few other things that, blood pressure situation and cardiovascular stuff. So I need to, for me, be a healthier version of me, so that I can live long enough to see my kids grow up properly. I mean, they're 20 and 22.
But is that transformation, or is that just gradual shift?
I think it's pretty much same. At the end of the day, all transformation is a journey through change. Right. And so it can be a micro or it can be a macro journey. It doesn't really matter. And the mindset approach is still the same either way, because, from a personal perspective of transformation, if you start with the objective in mind and the goal, it makes life a lot easier. So you'll know in business, and you've helped so many people through businesses. I mean, I can't imagine the tens of thousands of companies and people you've helped, and hundreds of thousands of people you've helped in your life. I mean, I've seen you on stages for years and years and years and years and years talking about how the vision that people have is sometimes quite low in comparison to what their potential could be. Why do people think that their turnover should be $10 million? Why shouldn't their turnover be $100 million? Why would you only set the bar low? My view is that, Wayne Gretzky, the hockey player, was asked in an interview on CNBC once, said, Wayne, why do you think you've scored more goals than anyone else in ice hockey? And he said, I miss 100% of the shots I don't take. And I was like, oh. So really, the reason why he's achieved more goal scoring than anyone else is because he's tried more than anyone else. Yeah. Because he's actually set the bar higher, right? There's lots and lots of business people in the world who can help you try and grow your business from a 500,000 turnover to $1 million turnover. But there's very few that say, okay, we've got 500,000 turnover. Let's make that 50 million turnover. If someone gives me $250,000 in investment, my view is to return them 2.5 million. My baseline is 10x everything. And so if anyone's listening to this thinking, yeah, well, I know, but we can't do that because we've maxed our business out. We're making $7.5 million profit, and that's as much as we can make. I bet you there's a way of making $75 million profit. I bet you there is.
We'll be back in just a moment on the Big Success Podcast. We're going to talk about scaling up and going big.
Jonathan J. MacDonald has been working in the digital industry for over 20 years and has helped companies such as Google, Microsoft, and IKEA to navigate the ever-changing landscape of the digital age. He has also authored several books, including Powered by Change and Brand vs. Wild, which offer valuable insights on how businesses can adapt and thrive in today's fast-paced world. To learn more about Jonathan, please visit his website today.
So, Jonathan, I got to ask, you've consulted with some of the biggest companies in the world. What's the difference between a company that, does good and a company that does amazing? What do you see as a difference in those?
Well, there's been some brilliant research on this. Cotter and Heskett did some great research. HBR have done some brilliant research, and everyone's research turns out the same. The outcome is always the same. In good to great, and all the other pieces of work that have been done, the answer is the answer. has been for the last 100 years of commercial enterprise. The answer between a good company and a great company all boils down to a sense of purpose that people inside the business believe in. And it's always based on whether or not people believe in the reason why they're doing what they're doing. And the company has a clearly defined purpose. It's like, this is what we're doing. And everyone understands what they're doing and everyone believes and buys into what they're doing. And then the customers believe in what the company's doing and everyone goes along with the ride. That is the difference between an average organization that turns over, in the space of 10 years, their profit may increase by 10%, 11%. And a great organization, over 10 years, the profit will increase by 400 to 600%. And that's how most metrics are based on what good is and what great is. And it's always based on that thing. So then you look at that and think, right, so how can you enable sense of purpose and objective to be so clear? And it's like, well, ask yourself, why do you do what you do? Why do you think it matters? One of the questions I've asked people in large businesses in small businesses, is I say, what would happen if you stopped doing what you're doing? What would the impact be on life? And I remember a card company, like a greeting card retailer, said to me, and I said, what would happen if you went out of business? And they said, people would just walk 50 yards further up the road and buy a greeting card from a competitor. And I said, well, in which case you're already out of business. You're already dead. It took them 13 years to go bankrupt, but they did. And what the answer should be, if we went out of business, we would have 10 million complaints immediately because we would actually be ruining people's lives. How could you build a business that matters that much? And if you can't think of what would matter that much, then it's down to what would matter to you that much. If you can clarify, let's say three concentric circles. One is what you're genuinely good at. Like everyone has a latent talent, even if they don't use it. What you're genuinely good at. The other one is, next circle is, what makes you extremely happy? What doing what makes you extremely happy? And the third one is, what would enable other people to have extreme value from what you're doing? And if you can overlay what would enable value for other people, which by the way means what they're paid for, with what would make you extremely fulfilled yourself versus, and on top of what you're actually latently good at, what your dormant potential really is, that sweet spot in the middle means that, and you and I find this naturally. This is what we do. We are doing this now because we love doing it. We're good at doing it and it adds value to other people. So then it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
I saw this in my calendar coming up today on my birthday, the only meeting I'm taking on my birthday. And I'm thinking, great, I get to chat with Brad Sugars, the legend himself. I chat about this. We have loads of people listen to it. They then think that they can actually achieve more in their business and become more successful. It's a win-win-win. It's perfect. Easy.
So let's bounce that idea to individuals. How do you get an individual who has like a goal of, I don't know, 1 million a year and say to them, let's transform your thinking to 100 million or 1 billion a year? How do we leapfrog someone from level A to level Z type thing?
I think the first thing to do is to uncover what the barriers are, because mostly they're mental barriers, and those barriers tend to be bias barriers. And out of the biases, there's one that supersedes all else. And that one is loss aversion. People are so scared of what they could lose that they prefer to do nothing and have that type of loss rather than something and potentially lose it. I'll give you an example. So if you say to someone, I will give you $500 if you walk across the street and buy me a coffee, people go, wow, that's a great deal. The coffee's going to cost $10. I'm going to make $490 profit. Fantastic. So that's one deal. Then 2 minutes later, you go, actually, I normally pay people $5,000 to go and get me a coffee, but here's the $500 nonetheless. You feel as if you've just been robbed by $4,500. And that's because people's concept of what's losable expands as the information becomes greater. So if I say to you, right, I reckon I could turn your business into $1 billion company, but you're probably going to, at some stage, need to put your house on the line. You probably need to put your house up as collateral. They'll go, no way.
Yeah.
It's okay, right. So you don't want to lose $1 million home versus the potential of $1 billion business. No, I don't. It's like, okay, you're not suited to be a billionaire. You're not, this is not, the people who absolutely and utterly max out, who actually achieve their potential from a financial perspective, at some point or another have put absolutely everything on the line. And the reason why people don't necessarily want to achieve that much is not because they wouldn't like the trappings of that type of income, it's because the juice isn't worth the squeeze. And it's like, don't do the crime if you ain't going to do the time, right? So if you really want to 10x your business, 100x your business, what would you do? What would you put on the line for it? And if the answer is everything, because I believe so much in what we're doing, I'll put the whole damn lot on the line, the chances are you'll probably win. And if you don't win, you're going to learn so much that the next time you probably will win.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's go to the lightning round and let's talk about success in quick, short answers. What's the key to success in self-development?
Self-development success is based on your mindset as to what your potential is and understanding the difference between where you're at and where you could be.
How do you succeed at goal setting?
Have a crystal clear vision of what good would look like or feel like, or even observe other people's version of what good looks like and resonate with the bits that make you happy. And then you write that down as your goal.
How do you succeed at communication?
Understand the other person more than what you're trying to achieve in your communication outbound. If you can understand them from an inbound perspective, you can communicate 10 times better.
How do you succeed at relationships?
Exactly the same as the previous answer.
Very nice. How do you succeed at enjoying life?
Only do things that make you happy, disregard things that don't make you happy. And if you have to do things that don't make you happy, try and employ people who really, really love doing those things rather than you have to do it yourself. So
my final question of the day, what's the best advice you ever got on success, or even the best quote you ever heard on the subject of success?
Well, I'm not going to use one of yours because that'd be unfair to everyone and everyone would think that you're paying me to do this. But you've got many and your books are brilliant about this. Everyone who's listening, if you haven't read all of Brad Sugar's books, you have to do that immediately. But I would say that the success quote of all time is the Chinese proverb I mentioned earlier, which is, when the winds of change are blowing, some build a wall and others build a windmill. My view is that we should all be in the game of building windmills because the winds of change are perpetual. And if we can use them as a powering mechanism to be powered by change, we win.
Love it. Jonathan MacDonald, thanks so much for your time. Happy 50th birthday. Go have some more mimosas. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for your time. This is the Big Success Podcast. I'm Brad Sugars. See you again next week. And that's the Big Success Podcast for today. Hopefully you took a lot of notes. Hopefully you learned a bunch. And hopefully you're going to take action on it. BS, Brad Sugars, Big Success, take action. Check all the show notes for all of the links. So make sure that you have links to every single thing that every speaker has in our show notes. Check them now. Click the links. Take advantage of it. And I'll speak to you again next time on the Big Success Podcast.
You've been listening to the Big Success Podcast with the #1 business coach in the world, Brad Sugars. To learn more about how to achieve business and personal success, as well as how to level up or listen to past episodes, visit www.bradsugars.com.